Hello, 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 welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Mayhem, and this is Random Fandom, and today we are talking all about Guardians of the Galaxy, the #1 movie in the world right now as I put this together. This is going to be my review of Guardians of the Galaxy, telling you all the good, the bad, and everything about it, from the movie to the comic and whatnot. And it should be no surprise to anybody who has heard me talk about comics before that I am a huge Guardians of the Galaxy fan, so you can probably figure that unless this movie is just absolute crap, I'm going to be a big fan of it. And I was. I was a big fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, the movie, when I went to see it, loved it, thought it was great, and it's going to be among the best of the comic book movies, and especially of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. I'm putting this one right up there alongside Avengers and Captain America 3 and the first Iron Man as the best, the cream of the crop of the Marvel movies. I loved how this was put together. And I've been following the progress of the Guardians of the Galaxy movie pretty steadily ever since it was first announced, 2 years back. And I've liked everything they've done with it. I was following the casting decisions, the director decision with James Gunn. A lot of people thought James Gunn was a very off-the-wall choice, but they thought the same thing with Joss Whedon when it came to the Avengers. They thought Joss was too television-oriented. He wasn't a big-budget movie kind of guy, because he had never really done big-budget movies before. And they said the same thing with James Gunn for Guardians of the Galaxy. He's done some movies, but he's never really done big-budget, major, summer blockbuster-type movies. And I think people just sell these guys short. I think the #1 best thing you can do when finding a director for a comic book movie is to find somebody who loves it as much as the fans do. Is finding somebody who is a nerd themselves and who wants this thing to be done epically. The worst thing you can do is finding a big-time major director who just doesn't give a crap. And that's kind of what happened, like with Ang Lee's Hulk. Big-time major director Ang Lee, and he could care less about the Hulk. And that kind of showed through in his movie making. But no, James Gunn did a great job with Guardians of the Galaxy. So I'm actually going to start talking about the actual movie now, and specifically the good parts about it, because I don't have a lot of bad parts to talk about. There's hardly anything I can think of with this movie that was bad, but I'll start off with the best stuff. Pretty much this whole movie, beginning to end, was great. There were a few parts that were a little slow and might be a point where you go up and grab a refill on your drink or something, but the stuff that really shined through as great was, first and foremost, the humor. Now, all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies have had a fair touch of humor. I mean, nobody can think of Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark and not admit, yeah, he's cracking wise all over the place. And the same has been true of all of the Marvel movies to a certain extent. But there seemed to be more humor in this one than in any of the others. And that's great because it is such a weird mismatch of characters that they really all need to have good chemistry in order to come together as a good team. This is not like, Thor, Iron Man, Captain America as the big major heroes of the planet Earth. They have to come together even if their personalities don't mesh. No, these are a ragtag group of space rebels, so of course they need to have personalities that work well together in order to be together. So they play well off each other. The humor, especially the humor of Rocket Raccoon, who steals the movie. I mean, really, all of his lines are great. All of his jokes are great. He really steals the show and kind of puts a final pin in the notion that a lot of the naysayers on the message boards had that, oh, they're making a movie with a talking raccoon. Well, that's Disney for you. They've got to throw in something that they can make stuffed animals for the kiddies, something to get the kids in there. Yeah, anybody like me who's been a long-standing reader of Guardians of the Galaxy have been telling these people for years that's not anything close to what Rocket Raccoon is, and I think everybody knows that now. So he was great, great lines, great humor in him. The soundtrack of the movie is another shining point in the film. There's a lot of great songs in the movie, classic rock songs. Of course, everybody knows about that from the trailers and the Hooked on a Feeling especially, but there's not just that. I mean, the opening sequence of Peter Quill on a desolate, barren planet, I mean, it almost starts off kind of looking like an alien Indiana Jones. You know, the first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's all tense and dark as he's breaking into the temple and finding the lost artifact. It kind of had that feel until Peter Quill puts on his headphones and starts dancing around to Come and Get Your Love and, you know, lip-syncing it while there's alien creatures trying to scurry over him and he's just kicking them around while having a dance number. It's just a very fun way to open the movie. Another great thing, and something I personally have been waiting a long time for, and I think a lot of people have too ever since the end of the first Avengers movie, we get more of Thanos at last. And we don't just get a brief glimpse of him, we actually get some dialogue from him of Josh Brolin, who's playing Thanos now, doing the voice, and we get to see Thanos full on, not just an up-close picture of his face, but we see him in full profile, we see him straight on, we see him talking, having conversations with Ronan and Nebula, and it's great. Thanos finally revealed in all his full glory, so there's lots more Thanos to come, certainly, but we finally got our first real dose of Thanos. And another thing that I have to make special mention of, I thought Karen Gillan, who played Nebula, did an extra special job. Everybody did a great job playing their character, but if I had to pick one person who I think did a breakout, surprisingly great job in their character, I think Karen as Nebula did amazing. She didn't have a ton of screen time or anything, and she wasn't the main bad guy. She was more a lackey, if anything, but I don't know. There was just something about her. I've always been a fan of Karen Gillan's ever since I first saw her in Doctor Who, and then I liked her in Oculus, so maybe I'm partial to her, but I like how her character survived and lived to fight another day, so hopefully we'll see more of Nebula in future movies. And I think Kevin Feige has even talked a little bit already about how she's a strong possibility for coming back in future movies because everybody seemed to like her character. So I especially liked what Karen did with Nebula. So those are the really standout elements, but there really wasn't anything bad to say about the movie at all. So instead of listing negative aspects, because there weren't any real negative aspects that I can think of to name, I'm going to spend a little time talking about the inaccuracies from the comic book. Now, just to be clear, I am not saying that any of these things are bad. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the movie. I will always say that when you turn a comic into a movie, the movie makers have to be given a lot of leeway to change things. You can't condense several years of a comic down to a 2-hour movie without changing some stuff around. It just has to be done in order to make it palatable to not just the fans of the comic, but also general audiences as well. So I'm going to talk about how there was actually a lot of stuff, probably more so than any of the other Marvel movies, was changed from the comic. And if nothing else, just to give people who don't read the comic a bit of a notion of how it's been changed around. So the most glaring inaccuracy from the comic is how all these characters meet. In the terms of this movie, they all meet, well, 4 of them meet on Xandar because Rocket Raccoon and Groot are trying to track down Peter Quill to get the bounty that's on his head, and then Gamora is there to try to steal the orb that Peter Quill has. So those 4 meet up when they all end up just sort of fighting in the middle of the streets, and then they all get arrested and sent to jail, and that jail is where Drax happens to be, and that's when they fall in with him. So that's how they all meet in the terms of the movie. They all stage this prison break together, and that's how they all form a team. In the comic, they met during the Annihilation War. Most of them did anyway. Rocket Raccoon and Groot were put on a team under the command of Star-Lord, who were going to go break into the Kree homeworld to try to liberate it from the Phalanx who had taken it over during Annihilation Conquest. And then they had met Drax previously, before the conquest by the Phalanx. They had met him during the fight with Annihilus, because he was trying to kill Thanos, and Thanos had teamed up with Annihilus, and so it was a big convoluted story, but Drax was there trying to kill Thanos, and that's how they all met him. And Gamora was the girlfriend, sort of, at the time of Nova, Richard Rider Nova, and so they all just sort of knew each other through the Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest of events. Obviously, they couldn't do that for the movie, because me just saying it took like 5 minutes, and it's probably still unclear to people who haven't read it, because it is very detailed and a lot of backstory, and it's probably, 30 comics you would have to read in total just to sort of get the impression of what went on during the Annihilation series. So they had to condense it, they had to make it quicker and easier for the uninitiated audience. So absolutely no problem with them changing around how these characters all came to meet each other. Then there were a few individual characters who were very, very different from their comic counterpart. And again, I don't say that there's anything wrong with that. I just want to make mention of these things so people who don't read the comics know these characters aren't exactly the same as they were portrayed in the movie. Specifically, Ronan. Ronan in the movie was the big bad guy. He was the main villain. Even though Thanos was, trying to pull strings from behind the scenes, Ronan was the major threat. He was trying to destroy the Xandar civilization and their homeworld. And this is not exactly the Ronan from the comic books, because more often than not, in the comic books, Ronan has been a good guy. He has fought alongside Richard Rider Nova and the Guardians of the Galaxy most of the time. He tends to be one of the more trustworthy and honorable Kree members. And when it comes to the Kree civilization, the supreme leader, the supreme intelligence, tends to be the big jerk that everybody hates and wrecks everything and hurts people. And then Ronan is more of the noble warrior who is patriotic enough that he does what he's told, he follows orders, unless those orders are really bad and dishonorable, and then he'll go against them. So Ronan is actually a pretty nice character. Well, not nice, that's a bad word for it. He's an honorable guy. He's a trustworthy guy. He's the husband of Crystal from the Inhumans, who is a very positive, nice person, and she loves him very deeply. She's come to love him very deeply over the years. He's also been on a team known as the Annihilators, on a team with Silver Surfer, Beta Ray Bill, Gladiator from the Shi'ar, so some of the most powerful cosmic superheroes fighting evil across the galaxy. So he's not in the comics the villain that was portrayed in this movie. But this movie needed a good, strong villain, and Ronan is a really awesome character all around. So I didn't have a problem with them making him the villain here. And he was very adequately played by Lee Pace, who played him in the movie. Yondu was in the movie. He was the sort of adopted father of Peter Quill, the blue guy who had the arrow who he controlled by whistling. That was taken directly from the comic. In the comic, Yondu had arrows that he would fire, and then he could control them by whistling and move them around in the air. However, the big problem here is that Yondu is actually in the comic from the 31st century, so he's way far in the future. And he came back in time once or twice in the comic series and had run-ins with modern-day heroes, but for the most part, he's in the 31st century, so he wouldn't even be born yet. But he was always associated with Guardians of the Galaxy. He was one of the original members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, so I don't have any problem with them including him here either. And a main character that if I had one negative thing I could say about the movie, it was how Drax was portrayed. It seemed to me that Drax did good when fighting lackeys, when fighting the no-name sort of soldier characters who were just essentially meat for the grinder anyway. He did well fighting against them, but anything beyond that, he seemed to keep getting his butt kicked. He tried to fight Ronan twice, and in both instances, Ronan absolutely throttled him. And this doesn't seem in keeping with the Drax from the comic, because even though Drax in the comic wasn't and isn't a lot more powerful than he was portrayed in the movie, it was pretty accurate to how his powers are in the movie. He's just stronger, faster, and a better fighter than most in the comics. But also in the comics, he's really tactically skilled. He's really a shrewd character. So, like what he did in this movie where they were all hiding away on nowhere in the mining colony, and he ends up sending a message to Ronan because he wants Ronan to show up so he can fight him. That's not something Drax would ever do, because that's a terrible tactical move. And Drax, if nothing else, in the comics is a tactical genius. And in terms of just getting his butt handed to him every time he tries to fight Ronan, in the most recent issue of Guardians of the Galaxy, Drax was arrested by the Shi'ar Imperial Guard and sentenced to death, and he chose, as his way of being killed, he challenged Gladiator to one-on-one combat. Gladiator of the Shi'ar is basically like an alien Marvel version of Superman. Superhuman strength, speed, flight, all that stuff, and he's one of the most powerful cosmic characters around, and Drax challenged him to one-on-one combat. And even though their fight got interrupted by the Guardians of the Galaxy coming in to rescue Drax, Drax actually got in more hits on Gladiator than Gladiator did on him. So basically in the comics, Drax is capable of fighting one-on-one Superman-level characters, yet in this movie, he seemed not quite that bright and getting his butt kicked anytime he wasn't fighting lackeys. So if I had one single flawed bad thing to say about the movie, it's that Drax didn't get to showcase the skills that he should have had. But I didn't particularly dislike the way he was played. I think Dave Bautista did a good job of playing the character, and he had some funny lines. He was a good addition to the team. I didn't have a major problem with him, is what I'm saying. But just so you know, in the comics, Drax is a bit tougher of a character than that. So those are the main glaring inaccuracies that I noticed from the comic. And again, let me reiterate, none of those are a problem. None of those things made the movie any less enjoyable. None of them are things that I would have changed. I agree with every way they changed the characters and the backstories and how they all met and everything. No problem with it all. Just thought I'd throw that out there for those who don't know much about the comic. One final thing I want to spend a few minutes talking about is just sort of a recap on where we are with the Infinity Stones at this point, because I was talking with some of my friends after seeing the movie about what Infinity Stones we've seen so far and which ones we haven't. So just as a brief recap, we've seen 3 of the 6 Infinity Stones at this point. The first one was the Tesseract of the first Phase 1 Marvel films of Captain America and then of Avengers. So it's the blue one, and I believe that is the Space Infinity Gem, which stands to reason because it opens portals, it teleports stuff around, it teleported Loki and stuff. So that should be the Space Gem. Then we saw the Power Gem, which was the red one, and it took the form of the Ether in Thor 2. And Malekith absorbed it into himself, and it made him incredibly powerful, so much so that he was smacking Thor around like he was nothing. So that was the Power Gem. And now, here in Guardians of the Galaxy, we've seen this gem, the Purple Stone, and I believe that's the Reality Gem. And how they tended to use it throughout the course of the movie was to destroy planets. We saw a little vid clip of one of the Celestials, giant beings, who used to use the Infinity Stones, and he used it to destroy an entire planet. Ronan wanted to use it to destroy the Xandar homeworld. So how that would work is, since it's the reality gem, it can manipulate and alter reality. It would do so by destroying an entire world, manipulating the reality of that world to destroy it. So don't quote me on that being the reality gem, though, because they never actually came out and said that that's what it was, but I believe that that's what it's supposed to be in terms of the Infinity Stones. So we've seen the Space Gem, the Power Gem, and now the Reality Gem. So that leaves 3 we have yet to see: the Soul Gem, the Mind Gem, and the Time Gem. Now, the Soul Gem, if I had to guess, I would say we won't see that one until the next Guardians of the Galaxy movie, because the Soul Gem has always been the property of Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock is a very prominent Guardians of the Galaxy character, and he always, even before all the stones were put together, he was always the keeper of the Soul Gem. So if Marvel wants to keep with how they did things in the comics at all, they'll wait until they introduce Adam Warlock to bring in the Soul Gem. Adam Warlock will probably end up showing up in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And then there's the Mind Gem, which some people say we've already seen as being the gem on Loki's staff. I'm going to withhold judgment on that one. I'm not sure that that is one of the actual Infinity Stones itself. I'm kind of on the fence. Some people say it is because he used it to take over people's mind. That's a good argument because, yeah, he did. But on the other hand, it was given to him by Thanos, and if Thanos had one of the gems, I can't see him giving it up to anybody for any reason ever. So I kind of tend to think that that was just another weapon that was energized by the energy of the Tesseract that Thanos lent to Loki. So, but it could go either way. Maybe we've seen the Mind Gem, maybe we haven't. And then the one we haven't seen, other one we haven't seen would be the Time Gem, and who knows where that one's going to come from or what they'll end up doing with it. So 3 stones down that we've seen. The Tesseract is currently in the care of the Asgardians. The Power Gem, the Ether, is currently in the care of the Collector. And then the Purple Gem that was used in this Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I'm thinking the Reality Gem is what it is in the care of the Xandarians, the Nova Corps. So 3 down, 3 to go to find out what is going on with the other 3 gems still to come. So anyway, that comes to the close of my Guardians of the Galaxy wrap-up. As I've said, I've got nothing but positive things to say about it. It is one of my favorite of the Marvel films, right up there next to Avengers and Captain America 2. I give it 4 stars. Can't hardly think of anything bad to say about it. Seen it twice already. I'm going to go back and see it again at least one more time, probably twice. So certainly get out there and see it some more, because let's drive up the totals on this movie. I love the fact that people were estimating, like the critics and the people who work in the film industry, the people who do this stuff for a living, were saying it's going to make between $60 and $65 million on opening weekend. Like $65 million was the highest estimate they would give it. And then $94 million opening weekend. Blew them away. These are people who make these estimates professionally for a living, and they came in $30 million short of what this movie actually made. And then this movie has got great staying power. It's had the lowest drop-off from the opening weekend to the regular week. Lowest drop-off of any summer movie. I mean, it's not going to make $1 billion worldwide. I'm not that naive to say it's going to pull in that, but I would love to see it top $800 million worldwide and just absolutely blow away everybody's expectations, because it deserves to. It's that good of a film. So that is my very, very positive and upbeat review of Guardians of the Galaxy. Let me know what you thought of the movie. Let me know if you had any elements of the movie that you didn't like, and maybe there can be other people who come up with some more negative things to say about it, and maybe I'm just too overly positive about it, but I thought it was one of the better comic book movies ever made, and probably my favorite of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, next to, right up there with Avengers. So let me know what you think down below, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the next edition of Random Fandom.